Good afternoon, everybody. I was talking to one of my former colleagues earlier, and he told me that we were on a 15-minute time limit up here, and I was telling him that that's not even good enough time for me to get off a joke to start off, so, but I see that joke worked. So we'll just leave that at that, and I'll move forward to try to draw out some of the major issues that I want to address out of this paper. First, let me say thank you to the conference organizers. It is always an honor to be in the shadow of people like Dr. King and Benjamin Mays and Howard Thurman and the great men and women who helped to construct this space. So I'm honored to be here, to be a part of this wonderful conference, and to talk about my topic, Players and Pawns, Black College Presidents as Peacemakers and Social Agitators in the Jim Crow South. I was really drawn to one of the major themes that this conference says that it's going to hit on, and I'm sure it has been hitting on all day, and that is the people-to-people relationships that emerge out of many of these institutions that were built to try to advance issues of peacemaking, and certainly that opened up space for me to talk about historically black colleges. It is there throughout the 19th and 20th centuries that people-to-people relationships really sort of help to craft and hone young people to go out and be agents of social change in America. So I want to jump into this narrative, again, trying to move fairly quickly, but to set up this argument about these players and pawns, these black college presidents. In 1952, Ralph Ellison unveiled his classic novel, Invisible Man. This towering contribution to American literature detailed the life of an unnamed protagonist caught in the crosshairs of racial angst and a brooding identity crisis. Central to the main character's story was a relationship formed with Dr. Bledsoe, a president of a Southern black college. The anonymous narrator looked to Bledsoe for affirmation and hope, yet he was deeply betrayed by a vindictive tyrant who governed his campus with a vice-like grip. Bledsoe ultimately expelled Ellison's main character from the college, and the reader is left with the image of a cruel campus administrator who haunted those who crossed him long after their departure from his school. Ellison was not alone in his harsh assessment of black college presidents. Langston Hughes, another prominent member of the black literati, wrote a scathing indictment of black college life almost 2 decades prior to the release of Invisible Man. Hughes' essay entitled Cowards from the Colleges was published in the NAACP's Crisis magazine in 1934 and concluded that, quote, many of our institutions apparently are not trying to make men and women of their students at all. They are doing their best to produce spineless Uncle Toms, uninformed and full of mental and moral evasions. It's kind of harsh. There's a modicum of truth found in Ellison's and Hughes's heavy-handed critique of black college life and the men who presided over it. Highly skilled educators who were emasculated at every turn by their white overseers often clung to their status as appointed leaders in the black community and occasionally wielded that authority recklessly. Nevertheless, countless black college presidents, wore the mask that the poet Paul Laurence Dunbar so brilliantly and eloquently spoke of in his poem first published in 1895. But for that matter, so did millions of other black Southerners who found the mask to be a coping mechanism for the degrading and often deadly consequences associated with Jim Crow. In spite of these limitations, black college presidents in the early 20th century flexed their training in the New Negro Doctrine, of which many of them widely embraced. In doing so, many of them became masters of cultivating a hidden pedagogy that was imbued with idealism and race consciousness. While it is clear such acts missed the attention of outspoken critics such as Hughes and Ellison, it also slipped past the white power structure that thoroughly expected black college presidents to preside over colleges that trained and produced docile students who would form a cadre of working and professional class citizens that abided by Jim Crow. The city fathers who patrolled the day-to-day function of the towns and cities where these institutions were located considered this relationship essential to upholding the peace that ensured the white supremacy would go unchallenged in the public sphere. However, within the private spaces of black college life, as I talk about in my manuscript, the interstitial spaces, the youth culture on campus flourished by exposure to an environment that bolstered self-esteem, heightened their social and political consciousness, and provided them with a linked sense of fate to the masses. At times, students attending black colleges could count on contact between themselves and militant professors who often found a home in these Southern institutions. Black newspapers from across the country filled the libraries of many black colleges, keeping students abreast of social and political developments across the nation and even throughout the diaspora. Perhaps most importantly, black colleges served as a primary stop on the black lecture circuit, often hosting scholars, activists, politicians, and other notable figures. These visitors played a crucial role in crafting a vision of liberation that gave purpose, dignity, and mission to countless generations of students. And presiding over all of this were men who were skilled pragmatists, adept in their abilities to carve out interstitial space where the freedom dreams of black youth could take flight. And it's here where I'm going to deviate from a little bit from the paper and just sort of highlight very briefly some of the things that I want to mention. So my manuscript takes a look at 7 different institutions. Jackson State University, Tougaloo College, Cheyney State University, Southern University, North Carolina A&T, and I believe it's that, I always lose track of them. But I believe that's the 7 that, and Bennett College, I'm sorry, of Greensboro, North Carolina. And so I wanted to highlight very quickly 4 presidents, if I have time. Joseph Samuel Clark is who I want to start with first, who was one of the founders of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Joseph Clark is born in Northwest Louisiana, which is one of the most violent places in the South. And in fact, he's born in the midst of Reconstruction, as indeed a number of members of the White League have run out, supporters of the Republican agenda in the Northwest. So he's born into this environment, quickly moves up the ladder, becomes an educator, and then ultimately is going to be appointed as president of this institution, Southern University, as it makes its first opening in Baton Rouge. Southern University used to be located in New Orleans before its moving to Baton Rouge. But Clark was a disciple of Booker T. Washington. And he embraced the Washingtonian philosophy as so many other Southern black college presidents did. I want to briefly highlight a speech that he gave on October 13th of 1929. He's speaking at the South Louisiana State Fair. He said, "Give the Negro a chance and he will have no need to leave the South," declared Clark. He later emphasized that, quote, "the Negroes are very good friends to their white neighbors and will do anything within their power to make them happy and comfortable." Such rhetoric was in lockstep with the Washingtonian school of thought. In fact, of course, as many of you understand, Booker T. Washington, spoke right here in Atlanta at his very famous exposition speech and argued some of these same things. Such rhetoric was in lockstep with Washington's school of thought. But in the same manner in which the Wizard of Tuskegee subversively harbored ulterior motives to the advancement of the race, so too did Clark present a final goal. He concluded his address by offering a suggestion to those whites that were interested in ebbing the flow of blacks migrating to the north, noting that in order to stem that tide, it was necessary to construct new schools, improve housing, and increase wages for plantation workers. It is unclear who the dominant audience was among the fairgoers that afternoon, but the student paper reported that he received a generous applause. The other issue that I want to deal with in terms of trying to transform the narrative on many of these black college presidents is their involvement in the community. In Ralph Ellison's book, Invisible Man, he goes on to make the statement that many of the students who attended this Southern Negro College made no connection with members of the Black Belt. In fact, he suggested that the people of the Black Belt, the peons of the earth, if you will, from Alabama and Mississippi, were looked down upon by these individuals. And so I go to lift up this particular passage. Yet the image of insensitive and disconnected black college administrators who eschewed the poor and working class continued to prevail. It suited Ellison's mythos surrounding his fictional character, Dr. Bledsoe, who drew the class line and thusly cut off those who were beneath his status and unworthy of his time. Ellison dug further still by suggesting that this was a thought pattern that ran through the entire campus. Quote, "How all of us at the college hated the black belt people, the peasants, during those days," Ellison emphatically declared. "We were trying to lift them up, and they did everything, it seemed, to pull us down." And Joseph Clark's narrative acts as a counter-narrative to this. Southern University, like many other black institutions throughout the South, opened up their doors to help training of farmers, to provide them basic skills, and also to allow them to shine as leaders in their field. A month prior to what I'm going to move forward to talk now about the impact of race consciousness within these spaces. A month prior to Woodson's visit, Carter G. Woodson that is, students placed their developing race consciousness on display in the campus paper by writing an article on the importance of Liberia, a commentary that illustrated their expanding worldview and interest in the diaspora. One student even went so far as to denounce and discredit Abraham Lincoln's role as the great emancipator in an editorial, a claim that was especially sacrosanct in the black community. And while the very thought of establishing black studies as an academic field was still decades away, for a brief moment in time, Southern University offered an actual class in Negro history that developed a play on Negro life in 1933. While overt forms of public activism were far from becoming prominent, Depression-era Southernites adequately demonstrated that they were thinking critically about race and the possibilities of playing more active roles in dismantling white supremacy and Jim Crow. This was greatly facilitated by the administration of Joseph Clark and the faculty he employed and the community they created. Thus, by the time that his son Felton Clark took over as president in 1938, the school was well on its way to becoming a future breeding ground for radicals who sought to peacefully change the white power structure. One of the high points of that development came when local college and high school students organized a youth branch of the NAACP in Baton Rouge in 1938. And I want to briefly comment now, moving away from my notes in the paper, to talk about the actions and the space that's being carved out by these other presidents. David Dallas Jones at Bennett College, who comes to Bennett College in the late 1920s, again, a product of the new Negro era. Bennett College has just been transferred into a single-sex institution, one of only two single-sex institutions to dedicate themselves to educating African-American women, of course, the other one being Spelman College right here in the AUC. But in that space, David Dallas Jones goes to work. Harper Council Trenholm becomes president of Alabama State University around the same time. These men go to work, carving out space, and they very much embrace the concept of racial consciousness, cultural nationalism. They expose their students to these ideas, and in doing so, they lift and heighten the expectations that students have for the society that they're going into to act as servants, to act as change agents in their community. And that plants and sows very, very important seeds moving forward. In 1937, students at Bennett College are going to lead a boycott of the downtown theaters in Greensboro, North Carolina, a peaceful boycott encouraged by David Dallas Jones. In fact, his own daughter is one of the leaders of this movement. She attended Bennett College. Harper Council Trenholm is going to carve space to recruit a number of faculty members, people like Joanne Robinson, who was one of the principal architects of the Montgomery bus boycott. He goes on to hire people like Thelma Glass and James Pierce, Rufus Lewis, who was a part-time football coach but full-time activist, who very much engaging the community in terms of voter registration. These were very dangerous ideas and dangerous concepts in the 1950s. We're talking about Alabama and Mississippi, the Black Belt, where people certainly could be fired for these type of actions, but also, of course, could have suffered worse for these type of actions. So black college presidents have to be accredited with carving out this space. And in doing so, again, they're recruiting a number of individuals who come on to really help to transform students in this particular regard. I want to talk very lastly about Jacob Reddix, who's one of the more controversial people within my paper. Jacob Reddix, of course, becomes president of Jackson State University in the 1930s, early 1930s. And when he comes on board, Jacob Reddix is actually cut from this cloth of Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey. He was known for promoting cooperatives, and in fact, I was given a paper at Duke last year, and I read this piece about Jacob Reddix, and someone came after me and said, it sounds like he was an activist, and he was indeed embracing these concepts of activism, of self-help, of lifting up black communities. When he comes to Mississippi, he is forced to sort of transform his politics. And in fact, he leaves a position that he was hired in, the New Deal in the Farm Administration, and comes down to become president at Jackson State University. When he arrives at Jackson State, he, of course, is going to be expected to toe that line by the white supremacists who are in control of the purse strings, who hold the front door to the institution, and he very much does that. However, much like other presidents before him, he carves out that space. The Student Negro Youth Congress, SNCC, the very first SNCC, is going to open up a chapter at Jackson State University in the 1930s. Students, when you read the student newspapers, which my research is heavily dependent upon, this is one of the things that black college scholars, people who studied the movement, really haven't paid attention to black student newspapers. And we read these student newspapers, we see who these students were exposed to, we see their own political thoughts in these editorials, we see them, who they are embracing as far as faculty members. And when you read the student newspapers of Jackson State University, you see Jacob Reddix, again, carving out space for this type of development. But he also recruits a number of individuals who are going to become conflicted by this. Margaret Walker Alexander is one of them. Margaret Walker Alexander, of course, is the very famous poet, essayist, and novelist who teaches at Jackson State University for over 30 years. She's recruited by Jacob L. Reddix to come down and teach. She does so, but she finds his politics off-putting. She finds the politics of Mississippi off-putting, but yet she cannot find the voice, summon the courage to really speak to these issues. So I want to lift up very quickly, and how am I doing on time? 2 minutes, all right. So I wanted to lift up, and in fact, I'll just move past that and just talk very briefly about what she says in that passage. So she writes this piece where essentially she says, what can we do? How can we summon our voices? We are under siege in Mississippi. We are afraid in Mississippi. If we speak out, we will lose our jobs. They have been told if they join the NAACP that they will lose their jobs. So Mississippi sort of offers an alternative environment. Again, not to suggest that other places throughout the South aren't hostile, but of course Mississippi was the belly of the beast. And when you lived in the belly of the beast and you're exposed to those type of politics, it becomes extremely difficult to continue to advance overt protests. But there is, again, some subtle protests that's going on underneath, and you see students, again, speaking out in their papers. Ultimately, in the 1960s, students will finally begin to move out in greater numbers and begin to engage in activism. Jacob Reddix will very notoriously expel many of those students, engage in very hostile relationships with them. So, he sort of serves as this a contrast in style, if you will. Here is Jacob Reddix, who is very much trying to keep peace with the Southern white folks who have granted him the opportunity to come and sort of survey and control this institution. But in doing so, he's going to burn some bridges into the black community. And these are things which people in Mississippi, particularly folks who are former activists, still sort of vilify him for. But one of the things that I'm doing in my study is sort of pulling, this is a long movement study, I'm pulling back the curtain, moving back into the 30s and the 40s and 50s, and it's there that we see Jacob Reddix very much, again, exposing students to opportunities to engage in activism, and he does that as so many other black college presidents do. And again, I'm sorry for moving so quickly through that. I'm trying to make sure I try to address everything that I wanted to before wrapping up. So thank you.